Hi there, and welcome to Q English. In this series, we explore the lives of amazing people and help you improve your English at the same time. Ready? Let's dive in. Robert Koch, The Relentless Pursuit of Invisible Enemies. Chapter 1. A Curious Boy in Clausthal. Robert Koch was born on December 11, 1843, in a small mining town called Clausthal, located in the Harz Mountains of Germany. The town was known for its silver and lead mines, and many of the people who lived there worked in mining or related trades. Robert's father, Hermann Koch, was a mining engineer, a respected profession at the time. His mother, Matilda, was the daughter of a high-ranking government official. Together, they raised 13 children. Robert was the third child in the family. Growing up in a large family meant that Robert had to learn patience and independence early on. There were many siblings to share meals, space, and attention with. Yet, from an early age, Robert showed signs of being different. He was quiet but deeply curious. While some of his brothers and sisters enjoyed noisy games or running outdoors, Robert was often found with a book or examining insects, plants, and rocks in the garden. One remarkable story from his childhood tells us how precocious he was. By the time he was only 5 years old, Robert had taught himself to read. No one knew how he had done it. His parents were surprised one day when they saw him reading the newspaper out loud. It turned out that Robert had learned the alphabet by studying the letters on signs and in books that were lying around the house. This act of self-teaching amazed his family and revealed a part of his character that would remain with him forever. A deep, self-driven love for learning. Robert's fascination with nature was clear. He collected beetles, drew detailed pictures of birds, and was always asking questions. Why do these animals live here? What do they eat? How does this plant grow? His father supported this interest, sometimes taking Robert on walks through the woods, explaining the rocks and minerals they saw along the way. These early experiences helped him connect deeply with the natural world. Although Clausthal was a small town, it had good schools. Robert first attended the local primary school, where he did well in reading, writing, and math. His teachers described him as disciplined and focused. More importantly, Robert seemed to find joy in understanding how things worked. He was not satisfied with memorizing facts. He wanted to know why. As he grew older, his parents realized that Robert needed more than what a small-town school could offer. In 1851, at the age of 8, he was sent to the gymnasium in Clausthal, a type of secondary school in Germany that focused on academic studies, especially Latin, Greek, mathematics, and science. These subjects were considered essential for students who wanted to attend university in the future. At the gymnasium, Robert performed well, but he especially excelled in mathematics and natural sciences. His Latin was not as strong, but he made steady progress. One of his teachers, Mr. Reimer, noticed that Robert had a talent for close observation and logical thinking. Mr. Reimer often encouraged him to do extra projects, such as drawing diagrams or researching topics outside the regular curriculum. During these years, young Robert also developed an interest in the world of medicine. This was not because he wanted to become a doctor right away, but because he was fascinated by the idea that invisible causes could produce visible effects, such as fever or pain. He started to read books about the human body and diseases, and he wondered, could one find the exact reason why someone becomes sick? Outside of school, Robert was still the same curious boy. He spent hours in the attic of his house, where he had set up a little laboratory. With basic tools, glass jars, and a magnifying glass, he experimented with water, soil, and plant life. He wrote notes in a journal, which he kept secret from his siblings. For him, these activities were more than play. They were serious investigations. Another significant influence came from the books he read. One book in particular, Natural History for Young Minds, was a gift from his uncle. It introduced ideas about tiny creatures living in water and air. Though the germ theory had not yet been widely accepted, some early scientists had begun to suspect that diseases might be caused by microscopic organisms. For Robert, this idea planted a seed of lifelong curiosity. In 1859, at the age of 16, Robert completed his secondary education and earned excellent marks, especially in science and math. His parents were proud but also unsure about what path he would take. Some of his brothers were already working in the mining industry, following in their father's footsteps, but Robert had different dreams. He wanted to understand the secrets of life itself. He wanted to study medicine. When Robert announced that he wanted to go to university to become a doctor, his parents agreed, though it would mean financial sacrifice. University was expensive, and with so many children, every coin counted. But they believed in Robert's potential. That same year, he applied to the University of Göttingen, one of the most respected universities in Germany. As Robert Koch boarded the train to Göttingen in 1862, carrying a small suitcase and a head full of dreams, he was not yet the man who would change the future of medicine. But the foundation was set. A childhood filled with curiosity, discipline, and wonder had shaped a mind that would soon challenge the unseen enemies of human health. Chapter 2. From Student to Surgeon, the Göttingen Years. In 1862, at the age of 19, Robert Koch began his studies at the University of Göttingen. The school was known for its strong focus on natural sciences and medicine. It had a long history of producing outstanding doctors and researchers. For Robert, this was not only the beginning of a higher education, it was the beginning of a life dedicated to solving medical mysteries. At first, university life was both exciting and challenging. Koch came from a small town, and Göttingen was much bigger and more complex. The lectures were harder than anything he had experienced before. Latin medical terms filled his notebooks. He had to learn anatomy, physiology, and chemistry, often staying up late to review diagrams or memorize complicated names of bones and organs. One of the most important influences during his time at Göttingen was Jacob Henel, a famous professor of anatomy and histology, the study of tissues. Henel was known for supporting the idea that diseases might be caused by tiny living organisms. Although this germ theory was not yet widely accepted, Henel taught that medical science must rely on observation, evidence, and logic, not tradition or guessing. These ideas left a strong impression on Koch. Henel's lectures lit a spark in Koch's mind. The idea that invisible agents could cause illness was fascinating. Koch was especially intrigued by the possibility of proving such a theory with physical evidence. He began to ask himself, how can I use what I learned in the lab to understand real diseases in real people? To build his skills, Koch also studied under other great professors. He learned how to use a microscope to examine blood cells, muscle fibers, and even bacteria, though the microscopes of the time were still quite basic. He practiced dissection in the anatomy lab, cutting open cadavers to trace the path of nerves and blood vessels. He also performed simple chemical tests to understand how the human body worked. Outside of class, Koch did not have a wild student life. He was not known for partying or spending hours in cafes. Instead, he spent his free time reading, experimenting, and writing notes. He also began to develop a habit of carefully organizing his thoughts in notebooks, a habit that would later support his detailed scientific reports. After 3 years of intense study, Koch completed his final exams and earned his medical degree in 1866 at the age of 23. His doctoral thesis was about the structure of the uterus in pregnant rabbits, a subject that may sound strange today but showed his skills in microscopic examination and detail-oriented research. More importantly, it proved he could handle scientific work with care and accuracy. After graduating, Koch needed to begin his career. He didn't jump straight into research. Like most young doctors, he first had to gain real-life experience with patients. He took a job as an assistant in a hospital and later opened a small private medical practice. During this time, he treated a wide variety of illnesses, from broken bones to lung infections. He often visited sick patients in their homes, traveling by horse or foot through cold German winters. These early years taught him the realities of disease. Unlike the clean environment of a classroom or lab, real medicine was messy. People died from infections that had no clear cause. Antibiotics did not exist yet. Many doctors still believed in miasmas, bad air, or evil spirits as reasons for illness. Koch saw patients suffer from fevers, rashes, and strange swellings that he could not yet explain. He wanted answers. In 1870, war broke out between France and Prussia. Koch, like many other doctors, was called to serve. During the Franco-Prussian War, he worked as a field doctor, treating soldiers on the battlefield. These were harsh conditions. Wounds were deep and dirty. Infections spread quickly. Often, more soldiers died from disease than from actual combat injuries. The war gave Koch a painful but powerful experience. He saw, with his own eyes, how deadly infections could be. Soldiers would recover from surgery only to die days later from sepsis or tetanus. Why did some wounds become infected while others healed? Why did some people fall sick after drinking water while others stayed healthy? Again and again, he was faced with the same question: what causes disease? After the war, Koch returned to civilian life with a stronger sense of purpose. In 1872, he became a district medical officer in the small town of Wolsztyn in present-day Poland. This might have seemed like a quiet job, but it came with great responsibility. Koch had to care for a large rural population, manage outbreaks, and track patterns of disease. In Wolsztyn, Koch began setting up a small laboratory in his home. He bought a microscope using his own money and started building tools from whatever he could find: glass dishes, wooden boxes, and bits of metal. He read scientific journals in German and French, keeping up with the latest discoveries in microbiology. He experimented late into the night, while his wife, Emmy, and their young daughter slept in the next room. It was here, in this modest home lab in a remote town, that Robert Koch began the work that would change the world. But that story belongs to the next chapter. For now, what we see is a young man transformed from a curious child to a hard-working student, to a war-tested doctor, and finally to a self-taught scientist ready to investigate the mysteries of disease. His journey through education was not glamorous, but it was built on focus, integrity, and deep curiosity. As Koch once said in a letter to a colleague, "I cannot be content with only healing. I must understand the cause." That sentence, more than anything, explains the mind of the man who would soon take on the world's deadliest diseases, armed only with a microscope, a sharp mind, and relentless determination. Chapter 3. Unlocking the Secret of Anthrax. After settling in the small town of Wolsztyn in 1872, Robert Koch began what would become one of the most important scientific investigations of the 19th century. By day, he served as the district medical officer, treating patients with fevers, injuries, and stomach illnesses. But by night, and sometimes even during lunch breaks, he turned his home into a laboratory. In a room next to the kitchen, Koch used a simple microscope, a few glass plates, and basic tools to explore the invisible world of microbes. At the time, the idea that diseases were caused by tiny living organisms was still controversial. Most doctors believed in vague explanations, such as bad air, unbalanced fluids, or spiritual causes. Some scientists, like Louis Pasteur in France, had started to suggest that germs were responsible for infections, but there was not yet clear proof linking a specific germ to a specific disease in animals or humans. Koch was determined to change that. His opportunity came with a deadly disease that farmers feared across Europe: anthrax. Anthrax was a terrifying illness. It mostly affected livestock, sheep, cows, and goats, but it could also infect humans. Farmers would often wake up to find several animals dead in their fields. The bodies would swell rapidly, and dark blood would leak from the nose or mouth. If a human came into contact with an infected animal, they could develop large black sores, a high fever, and often died within days. Entire villages suffered when outbreaks occurred. Koch had seen many anthrax cases during his work as a doctor. He wanted to know what was killing these animals. Using blood samples from infected livestock, Koch began his experiments. He placed tiny drops of blood under the microscope and observed them carefully. He noticed something striking: long, thread-like rods that were not present in the blood of healthy animals. These rods were motionless but consistent in shape. Koch suspected that they were living organisms. These rods were what we now know as Bacillus anthracis. the bacteria that causes anthrax. But observation was not enough. Koch knew that to prove these rods were the cause of anthrax, he had to fulfill 3 conditions. 1. Show that the organism is always present in sick animals, but not in healthy ones. 2. Be able to isolate it and grow it outside the body. 3. Infect a healthy animal with it and cause the same disease. These 3 steps later became known as Koch's postulates, a scientific method that changed microbiology forever. To test the second condition, Koch developed a new method. He placed the bacteria on a glass slide and covered it with gelatin or slices of boiled potato, simple substances that could support growth. Over time, he observed the bacteria multiply outside the animal's body. This was the first time anyone had successfully grown Bacillus anthracis in pure culture. To complete the third condition, he injected the cultured bacteria into healthy mice. Soon after, the mice developed anthrax symptoms. When he examined their blood, he again saw the rod-shaped bacteria. Koch repeated these experiments many times. He even photographed the bacteria, another innovation. Using a camera attached to his microscope, he created detailed images of the anthrax bacillus. These photos served as undeniable proof. In 1876, he published his findings in a paper that shocked the scientific world. The etiology of anthrax, based on the life history of Bacillus anthracis. He had done something no one else had, connected a specific microbe to a specific disease through direct evidence. It was not just a theory, it was science that could be seen, tested, and repeated. This work not only proved the germ theory of disease, it created a whole new path for medicine and biology. Koch's work also brought him into contact with major scientists of the time. Louis Pasteur, who had proposed the idea that microorganisms cause fermentation and disease, was impressed by Koch's clear methods and bold conclusions. Their paths would cross again in the coming years, sometimes as colleagues and sometimes as rivals. Koch's discovery had practical benefits. 2. Farmers could now understand how anthrax spread from contaminated soil, animal remains, or even tools. Hygiene and prevention became possible. The risk of infection was no longer mysterious. It could be managed through science. Even more, Koch's methods opened the door to studying other deadly diseases. If anthrax could be solved, what about tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid? In a letter to a friend, Koch wrote, "I feel as if I am standing at the gates of a new world. Each small shape under the lens may hold the key to life or to death." His humble home lab in Wallstein had become the birthplace of a revolution in medicine. Though Koch remained in Wallstein for a few more years, his reputation began to grow. Scientists, professors, and government officials started paying attention to the quiet doctor with a microscope and a sharp eye for detail. He had no big research grant, no fancy equipment, and no official university position. But he had what mattered most: a clear mind, a steady hand, and a fearless spirit. This was only the beginning. Robert Koch had proven that the invisible could be made visible, and that knowledge, once hidden, could save countless lives. In the next chapter, we'll see how Koch's success with anthrax brought him into the world's top scientific circles, and how he developed even more tools and techniques that transformed the way we study disease. Chapter 4. From Village Doctor to National Scientist. By 1878, Robert Koch's work on anthrax had reached far beyond the small town of Wallstein. His careful experiments, photographs, and scientific publications earned him recognition across Germany and even in other parts of Europe. What began as quiet research in a home laboratory was now being discussed in universities and medical journals. That same year, Koch was invited to present his findings to the Imperial Health Office Kaiserliches Gesundheitsamt. In Berlin, this was a major honor. The office was responsible for public health across the German Empire, and its leaders were eager to understand how Koch had achieved what so many others had failed to do. In Berlin, Koch met Dr. Max Pettenkofer and Dr. Rudolf Virchow, 2 of the most famous scientists of the time. While Virchow remained skeptical of the germ theory, others at the health office were impressed by Koch's precision and logic. One rising star in particular, Dr. Friedrich Loeffler, became an admirer of Koch and later worked closely with him. Recognizing his potential, the government offered Koch a position as a full-time researcher at the health office. This meant he could stop working as a district doctor and finally dedicate all his time to laboratory science. In 1880, Koch moved permanently to Berlin. With government funding, he received better microscopes, new glassware, and proper lab assistance. He was no longer working alone. Now, he had a team and a mission. Revolutionizing laboratory science. Koch was not satisfied with what microscopes and tools could currently do. He wanted to see more clearly, grow bacteria more purely, and identify microbes more precisely. So he began developing and improving laboratory techniques that would change the field forever. One of his greatest contributions was the use of solid media to grow bacteria. Previously, scientists used liquid broth, which made it hard to separate different types of microbes. But Koch realized that if he could spread bacteria over a solid surface, he might be able to isolate them into individual colonies. At first, he used slices of boiled potato, which worked surprisingly well for certain bacteria. Later, he and his assistant Walther Hess began using gelatin. And then finally, agar-agar, a jelly-like substance derived from seaweed that was stable even at warm temperatures. With agar plates, Koch could grow pure colonies of bacteria and study their form, size, and color more closely than ever before. These techniques became the foundation of modern microbiology. He also improved staining techniques, using dyes like methylene blue to color bacteria, making them easier to see under the microscope. By doing this, he helped identify key features of bacteria, such as their shape, rod, sphere, spiral, and how they clustered. Another innovation was the use of immersion oil and high-powered lenses, which gave clearer images of tiny organisms. These improvements helped scientists around the world replicate Koch's methods with greater success. Searching for the next killer. After anthrax, Koch turned his attention to other deadly diseases. One major focus became wound infections, particularly those occurring after surgeries or injuries. In 1878, he published a paper titled The Etiology of Traumatic Infective Diseases, where he studied gangrene and blood poisoning. Using his new methods, he isolated the bacteria responsible for several of these conditions. Koch's work was doing more than explaining disease. It was saving lives. His research supported the idea that surgical tools and environments needed to be sterilized. Doctors began cleaning their instruments, washing their hands, and using antiseptics. Death rates in hospitals began to drop. By the early 1880s, Koch had become more than a scientist. He was a public figure. The government, recognizing his value, gave him a leading role in future national health campaigns. Yet, despite growing fame, Koch remained focused on the work itself. He once wrote, "Fame is nothing if it does not help us prevent the next outbreak." He knew that bacteria were not just interesting, they were deadly, and every discovery brought humanity one step closer to defeating them. Influence and collaboration. As Koch's fame grew, so did his circle of students and collaborators. Talented young scientists came to Berlin from across Europe to study under him. Men like Friedrich Loeffler, Georg Gaffke, and Paul Ehrlich all spent time in Koch's lab, learning his techniques and later making their own discoveries. Together, they began identifying new bacteria, each one linked to a different disease. It was like opening a book that had been sealed for centuries. Every page revealed new enemies and new ways to fight them. Koch also began corresponding with scientists in England, France, and Russia. While rivalries existed, especially between German and French labs, there was also a growing sense of shared purpose. Diseases knew no borders. If a cure was found in Berlin, it could save lives in Paris or London. A man of method. What set Koch apart was not just intelligence, it was discipline. He insisted that all experiments be repeated, results be recorded carefully, and claims be backed by evidence. In a time when some scientists jumped to conclusions, Koch remained patient and exact. His lab was known for its silence. There was no shouting, no rushing, only quiet observation, note-taking, and careful planning. His assistants respected him deeply. He rarely raised his voice, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. In 1881, Koch published a summary of his work on microbial techniques in a report for the German government. This report was translated into several languages and became a guidebook for laboratories around the world. It was clear Robert Koch had transformed medicine from art into science. By 1882, Koch was preparing to take on one of the deadliest diseases of all time, tuberculosis, but his journey from country doctor to internationally known scientist was already complete. He had built the tools, he had trained the team, and most of all, he had lit a fire in the world of science that could never be put out. In the next chapter, we will witness how Koch tackled the White Death, and how one announcement in a small lecture room shook the world of medicine. Chapter 5. The White Death, Koch's greatest discovery. In the late 19th century, tuberculosis was the deadliest disease in Europe. Known as the White Death, it seemed to strike without warning. It wasted away the bodies of its victims slowly and painfully. Pale faces, blood-stained handkerchiefs, endless coughing fits. These were the signs that a person was dying from TB. It killed the poor and the rich alike, artists and workers, children and parents. In cities like Berlin, 1 in every 7 deaths was caused by tuberculosis. Doctors could offer little more than rest, sunlight, and hope. No one truly understood what caused it. Some blamed bad air, others thought it was inherited, and many still believed it was simply unavoidable. But Robert Koch had a different idea. He believed, as he had proven with anthrax, that a specific germ was the cause, and in the early 1880s, with his methods now perfected, he began to search for the killer. The race to find the cause. Using samples from the lungs of patients who had died of TB, Koch prepared microscope slides with his improved staining techniques. He had developed a special combination of methylene blue and brown dyes that made the bacteria easier to see. Day after day, he studied the lung tissue. And then he saw it. A thin, curved rod, slender and waxy, that appeared again and again in infected tissue. It was invisible to the naked eye, but consistent in shape and behavior. In healthy lung tissue, it did not appear, but in every TB patient, it was there, hiding inside the cells. He had found the enemy, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. But Koch knew that simply seeing the bacterium was not enough. As always, he returned to his guiding principles: observe, isolate, grow, and reproduce the disease. This meant he had to cultivate the bacteria outside the body and then show that it could cause tuberculosis when introduced to healthy animals. This was no easy task. The TB bacillus grew extremely slowly, sometimes taking weeks to form colonies on agar. It also required special conditions, which Koch adjusted carefully. Still, he succeeded. He then injected the bacteria into guinea pigs. Slowly, the animals began to develop signs of tuberculosis: wasting, coughing, lesions in their lungs. It was the proof he needed. Koch had done it again. March 24, 1882, a historic announcement. On the evening of March 24, 1882, Robert Koch stood before a group of scientists and physicians at the Berlin Physiological Society. The room was crowded. Many attendees had no idea what to expect. In a calm voice, Koch began to speak. He explained the process step by step, displaying stained slides and even showing the bacteria through his microscope. As he reached the final slide, clear, sharp, and undeniable, there was silence in the room. Then a wave of astonished murmurs. He concluded with the quiet words, "If the importance of a disease for mankind is measured by the number of deaths it causes, then tuberculosis must be considered the most important. I have discovered the bacillus that causes it." The announcement made headlines across Europe the very next day. For the first time in history, the mystery of tuberculosis had a name, a shape, and a path forward. What had seemed like a ghostly disease was now a biological enemy, one that could be studied, tracked, and someday defeated. A hero of medicine. Koch's discovery brought him worldwide fame. In the months that followed, scientists in other countries confirmed his findings. Laboratories in Paris, London, and St. Petersburg began using his staining techniques. His paper was translated into English, French, and Russian. For the public, he became a symbol of hope. Families who had lost loved ones to tuberculosis finally saw a future in which children could grow up without fear. Newspapers called him the conqueror of death. In 1885, Koch was appointed professor at the University of Berlin and became director of the newly created Institute for Infectious Diseases. It was a position designed just for him, a place where he could lead research and train the next generation of bacteriologists. Yet, Koch remained modest. He refused to claim he had cured tuberculosis. He knew the hardest part still lay ahead, finding a treatment. Setting the gold standard. Beyond tuberculosis, Koch's discoveries set a standard for disease investigation. Scientists now followed his methodical steps to identify the causes of many illnesses. The Koch postulates, though later refined, became the cornerstone of medical microbiology. Thanks to his influence, bacteria were identified for typhoid fever, diphtheria, cholera, tetanus, and more. He had lit a torch, and now others were running with it. In the lab, Koch became a teacher and a mentor. He was respected not only for his mind, but also for his generosity. He allowed others to use his methods freely. He believed that science should serve the world, not one man's pride. A personal toll. Despite the acclaim, the work took a toll on Koch's personal life. His marriage began to suffer. Long hours in the lab, constant travel, and the emotional burden of working with deadly diseases created distance between him and his wife Emma. Eventually, they separated. Koch found comfort in his work, and later in the companionship of a much younger woman, Hedwig Freiberg, whom he would marry years later. His health, too, began to weaken. He was often exhausted and sometimes ill, but he refused to slow down. For him, the war against disease was not over. It had only just begun. A global mission awaits. Having conquered one of humanity's oldest enemies, Koch now set his eyes on new horizons. In the years that followed, he would travel across continents to Egypt, India, and Africa to fight cholera, malaria, and sleeping sickness. But no matter where he went, people remembered that in one quiet evening in Berlin, a doctor with a microscope had changed the course of history. In the next chapter, we will follow Koch as he faces new challenges overseas and as rivalries with other great scientists begin to shape his path. Chapter 6. The Cholera Quest. Koch abroad. After his groundbreaking discovery of the tuberculosis bacillus in 1882, Robert Koch was at the height of his scientific fame. But with this success came greater responsibility. The German government, realizing that his talents could serve not only Germany but the world, asked him to lead an international expedition. The mission: investigate and contain one of the deadliest and most mysterious diseases of the 19th century, cholera. Cholera was sweeping across regions of the world in violent waves. It could kill within hours, causing violent vomiting, diarrhea, and total dehydration. Entire towns were paralyzed by fear. In the crowded cities of Egypt and India, thousands were dying, and no one knew how to stop it. In 1883, Koch boarded a ship bound for Alexandria, Egypt, leading a team of doctors and laboratory assistants. He was no longer just a local scientist. He was becoming a global disease detective. Arrival in Alexandria. When Koch arrived in Egypt, the air was thick with worry. The streets of Alexandria were filled with noise, people, animals, and death. Bodies were carried out of homes at dawn. Public wells were being blamed, as were foreign visitors, curses, and climate. Koch immediately set up a temporary laboratory. With help from local officials, he began collecting water samples from wells, rivers, and drinking containers. He also performed autopsies on cholera victims to examine their intestines and organs. Working under heat, dust, and pressure, Koch and his team applied the same techniques he had perfected in Berlin: microscopic examination, staining, and bacterial culture. He quickly noticed something unusual in the intestines of the dead: a curved, comma-shaped bacterium. It moved rapidly under the microscope and appeared in great numbers. But again, Koch did not rush to conclusions. He needed to isolate the organism, grow it in pure culture, and demonstrate that it caused disease. However, the situation in Alexandria changed rapidly. The outbreak slowed down, and Koch realized he needed a new site to continue his investigation. Journey to India. Soon after, Koch and his team were invited to Calcutta, India, one of the most cholera-ravaged cities in the world. India had been suffering from the disease for decades. In the hot, humid neighborhoods, with open sewers and poor drinking water, cholera found its perfect host. In Calcutta, Koch set up a more advanced laboratory and resumed his work. He was able to isolate the same vibrio-shaped bacterium he had seen in Egypt. He grew it on agar plates and identified it consistently in the intestines of cholera victims. But here, Koch was also able to go further. He studied how the bacterium traveled through water systems. He traced outbreaks back to contaminated wells and public pumps. In village after village, he showed how poor sanitation led directly to deadly outbreaks. Though he was not able to infect animals with cholera, one of the limits of applying his postulates to this disease, the evidence was overwhelming. By 1884, he officially announced that he had discovered the causative agent of cholera, Vibrio cholerae. Clash of ideas. Back in Europe, however, not everyone was ready to accept Koch's conclusions. Some of his fiercest criticism came from France, especially from Louis Pasteur's followers. The rivalry between Koch and Pasteur was becoming one of the most famous in scientific history. While both men had done heroic work to prove the germ theory of disease, they differed in methods, personalities, and national pride. Pasteur had developed vaccines for rabies and anthrax, but he was a chemist by training, not a physician. Koch, on the other hand, had worked directly with patients and was rooted in medical microbiology. Their approaches clashed. In the case of cholera, some French scientists doubted that a single bacterium could explain the rapid and chaotic spread of the disease. Others were skeptical because Koch hadn't fully satisfied all of his own postulates with animals. Still, as more and more scientists repeated Koch's experiments, his findings were increasingly confirmed. Cholera was no longer a mystery. It was a bacterium, and it had a name. Changing the world of public health. The implications of Koch's work went far beyond the lab. Governments began investing in sanitation systems. Cities built modern sewage networks, filtered water supplies, and created health departments to monitor outbreaks. The message was clear. Clean water could save lives. In India, Egypt, and later in Africa, Koch's influence inspired colonial health officers and local leaders to study how diseases spread and how they could be stopped. His field research model became a blueprint for global epidemiology. Koch had transformed the role of the scientist. He was not just a man in a white coat in a lab. He was a traveler, an investigator, and a fighter against invisible enemies. A man torn between worlds. Despite his success, Koch began to feel the emotional weight of his travels. He missed the structure and peace of his lab in Berlin. Life in foreign lands, while exciting, was exhausting. The heat, language barriers, bureaucracy, and constant threat of infection wore him down. He also started to feel isolated. Though respected, he was often alone. His assistants came and went. Letters from home reminded him of the life he had sacrificed for science. In one of his journal entries, he wrote, "There is no rest for those who follow disease. But even in fatigue, I feel purpose. To see a child drink from clean water is worth every sleepless night." Returning a hero. When Koch returned to Germany in 1885, he was greeted as a national hero. Newspapers praised him, and medical schools lined up to adopt his methods. The government provided funding for a new institute for infectious diseases, a building worthy of his growing legacy. But not all moments were triumphant. A storm of new challenges was waiting. A controversial vaccine, more global travels, and even a Nobel Prize that would come, but not without cost. Koch's battle against cholera was just one chapter in a much larger war, but it was proof that science could save not just individuals, but entire populations. Chapter 7. Tuberculin, Triumph or Tragedy. By the late 1880s, Robert Koch had earned a place among the greatest scientists of his age. His discoveries had given the world powerful tools to fight disease, yet one thing still haunted him: the disease that had brought him fame, tuberculosis. Although he had identified the tuberculosis bacillus in 1882, a true cure or treatment remained out of reach. People continued to die in large numbers, especially the poor. Sanatoriums offered rest, but no real recovery. Koch could not accept that his role would be limited to diagnosis alone. He wanted more. He wanted to defeat TB, not just name it. A secret project. Around 1890, in his Berlin laboratory, Koch began working on a secret project. He was developing a substance, an extract from the tuberculosis bacillus, that he believed might serve two purposes, a diagnostic tool and a treatment. He called it tuberculin. The exact process by which he created tuberculin was kept secret, even from many of his colleagues. He heated and filtered bacterial cultures, creating a thick brown liquid. Koch believed that introducing this extract into the human body would stimulate an immune response, forcing the body to recognize and fight the tuberculosis bacillus. It was a bold idea. If it worked, it would be the first time in medical history that a bacterial product was used to cure an infectious disease. Koch saw it as his final masterpiece, a gift to humanity. But in his eagerness, he made a critical mistake. The announcement heard around the world. In August 1890, Koch made a surprise announcement in Berlin. He had discovered a substance that showed remarkable effects in the treatment of tuberculosis. The world reacted with shock and excitement. Newspapers printed headlines like, "Cure for consumption. Professor Koch's remedy offers hope to millions." Governments, doctors, and desperate patients turned their eyes to Berlin. Clinics were overwhelmed with people hoping to try the new treatment. The German emperor praised Koch, and plans were made for international use of tuberculin. Koch, usually cautious and methodical, seemed swept up in the wave. He gave public talks and allowed early testing. But what the public didn't know was this: very few scientific studies had been completed, and the full effects of tuberculin were still unclear. From hope to horror, as tuberculin was administered to more patients, the truth began to surface. The results were wildly inconsistent. Some patients developed high fevers, others experienced intense inflammation at the site of injection. In the worst cases, people who were already weakened by TB deteriorated rapidly and died shortly after treatment. Doctors across Europe started reporting these troubling outcomes. Critics called the treatment dangerous. Some accused Koch of rushing his work to gain attention and power. Newspapers that once praised him now turned skeptical. Even worse, Koch refused to reveal the exact formula of tuberculin, saying it was still being refined. This only deepened suspicion. For the first time in his life, Robert Koch was facing public backlash. A fall from grace. The failure of tuberculin deeply wounded Koch's reputation. In Germany, the medical community became divided. Some still believed in his work and supported continued research. Others accused him of endangering lives and acting irresponsibly. Internationally, the scandal became a symbol of scientific overconfidence. A once celebrated hero now faced embarrassment and doubt. The same man who had proven so careful and methodical in his earlier work was now seen as reckless. Koch himself was devastated. He withdrew from public life for a time. He admitted that tuberculin had not met his hopes as a treatment, but he continued to defend its value as a diagnostic tool. Indeed, later research would confirm this. Tuberculin could help identify hidden TB infections, especially in children. Still, the damage had been done. A private heartbreak. During this period, Koch also suffered personal sorrow. His marriage to Emma, already strained by years of separation and scientific obsession, officially ended. The loneliness and criticism took a toll on his health. Yet, in the midst of it all, a new relationship began to form, one that would bring him some comfort. He met Hedwig Freiberg, a bright, much younger actress who admired his work and spirit. The two became close and later married. She brought energy and warmth back into Koch's life, offering him companionship during a difficult period. Despite the failure as a cure, tuberculin did not disappear. It became the basis for the tuberculin skin test. which is still used today to determine whether someone has been infected with tuberculosis. In this way, Koch's work, though flawed, continued to help the fight against TB. Moreover, the Tuberculin episode became an important lesson in medical science, that even the greatest minds must submit their work to careful testing and peer review. The idea of blind trust in authority began to fade, replaced by a growing culture of scientific accountability. Koch never fully recovered from the tuberculin controversy, emotionally or professionally, though he continued to work and make important contributions, especially in Africa. Combating sleeping sickness and malaria, his status as a national idol was permanently altered. Yet he remained a giant in science. His earlier discoveries, anthrax, tuberculosis, cholera, could not be erased. He had changed medicine forever. As he entered the final phase of his life, Koch became more reflective. He traveled, taught, and mentored younger scientists. Though marked by failure, he carried with him the same deep belief that had guided his entire career. We do not rest. We learn from our errors, and we continue. Copyright notice. Ku English Channel. All rights reserved. This video and its content are protected by copyright law. Unauthorized copying, redistribution, re-uploading, or modification of this content is strictly prohibited and may result in legal action. Respect the creator. Do not steal. Chapter 8. In the Heart of the Tropics. Fighting New Enemies. As the 19th century neared its close, Robert Koch, now in his 50s, had faced both triumph and disappointment. Though the tuberculin episode had shaken his reputation, his contributions to science were still recognized as monumental. It was during this period that Koch received invitations from beyond Europe, urging him to bring his skills to a new and dangerous battlefield, Africa. In the vast and little understood tropics, European colonists and local populations alike were falling victim to mysterious diseases, fevers that killed without warning, parasites that invaded the blood, and a silent illness that put people into a death-like sleep. Once again, Koch's mission was clear: follow the microbes, understand them, and find ways to stop them. In 1896, Koch set sail for German East Africa, modern-day Tanzania, accompanied by a small group of assistants and armed with microscopes, notebooks, and a tireless drive. His destination was the hot, mosquito-filled interior, where malaria and sleeping sickness were spreading. Though Koch had never been trained as a tropical disease specialist, his methods remained sharp. As he had done with anthrax and cholera, he began with observation. He studied the symptoms of those infected and examined their blood under the microscope. In the swamps and villages, he witnessed the devastating effects of malaria, chills, fever, weakness, and death. The disease was especially deadly for children and those doing hard labor under the sun. Using blood smears, Koch observed the Plasmodium parasites, small organisms invading red blood cells, destroying them from within. But Koch's deeper focus turned to an even more mysterious illness, one that puzzled scientists across Europe. Known locally as nagana in animals and trypanosomiasis in humans, sleeping sickness caused individuals to grow increasingly tired, lose weight, suffer confusion, and eventually fall into a coma. The German colonial government wanted a solution, not only to protect lives, but also to support their control over African territories. Colonization, driven by political and economic goals, now depended heavily on medical science. Koch followed the disease into remote areas, dissecting infected bodies and animals. With great care, he studied the trypanosome snake-like protozoa in the bloodstream, using advanced staining techniques. He identified the tsetse fly as the likely vector, though others would later confirm its full role in transmission. Koch's reports were clinical, detailed, and groundbreaking, yet they also reflected a growing tension between his role as a scientist and the political expectations of empire. Koch's African expeditions were funded by colonial governments. These authorities saw disease not only as a health problem, but as an obstacle to economic control. Plantations, mines, and railroads needed healthy workers, and many colonial leaders saw native populations less as patients and more as a labor force to be protected for productivity. Koch found himself in a difficult position. His mission to heal was being influenced by politics. The medicines he tested, the policies he advised on, and the data he gathered were sometimes used to support colonial power, even when he disagreed with such goals. In one case, he recommended isolating infected individuals in remote camps, believing this would prevent outbreaks. While scientifically valid, the policy was later abused, leading to forced relocations and poor treatment of African communities. This conflict haunted Koch. He had always seen science as a way to serve humanity, but now he began to realize that science could be used, even misused, by those in power. Despite the moral complexities, Koch never stopped working in harsh environments filled with insects, heat, and limited resources. He set up mobile laboratories and taught local doctors and assistants. He made careful maps of disease spread, counted cases, and tested medications. His endurance impressed even those who disagreed with him. He also experimented with atoxyl, an arsenic-based drug used to treat sleeping sickness. The compound was toxic and caused side effects, including blindness, but at the time, it was one of the few available tools. Koch believed strongly in continued trials and adjustments to the dosage. In one journal entry, he wrote, "We are fighting enemies that cannot be seen. Our tools are still too crude, our knowledge too narrow. But every observation, every patient, every death teaches us something new." Though Koch's time in Africa was short compared to his work in Germany, its influence was lasting. He brought scientific discipline to tropical medicine, helping build a foundation for later researchers like Ronald Ross and Paul Ehrlich. More importantly, he helped shift global attention toward parasitic diseases, which had long been neglected by European scientists. His fieldwork, painstaking and detailed, remained a model for generations. Yet Koch's involvement in colonial health systems also raised ethical questions that modern historians continue to debate. Could he have spoken out more against injustice? Did he see African patients as equals or only as research subjects? These are difficult questions with no simple answers. By the early 1900s, Koch's health was declining. Years of travel, stress, and infection had taken their toll. He returned to Europe, where he was welcomed with honors and awards. Yet, in his heart, Koch knew that his greatest battle had never been with microbes, it had been with ignorance, poverty, and the limits of human power. In the final chapter of his life, recognition would come in full, a Nobel Prize, invitations from kings and emperors, and a final trip to the United States, but also illness, loss, and reflection. Chapter 9. The Nobel Mind, Honors, Reflection, and the Final Years. By the start of the 20th century, Robert Koch had become a living legend in the world of science. Despite the controversy surrounding tuberculin and the moral complexities of his work in Africa, few could deny the profound impact he had made. He had traced the invisible path of deadly diseases, changing the way the world understood infection. Now, as he entered the last chapter of his life, new honors would come, along with moments of deep personal reflection. In 1905, Koch received the highest recognition possible in science, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. The award honored his discovery of the tuberculosis bacillus and his groundbreaking contributions to bacteriology. The ceremony in Stockholm was dignified and emotional. In his acceptance speech, Koch spoke not only of his research, but also of the mystery that still surrounded tuberculosis. He admitted that much remained unknown and that further work was needed to fully defeat the disease. "We are still only at the beginning of our understanding," he said, "but with each discovery, we climb a little higher toward the truth." The prize was not only a reward for his past, it was a signal to future generations that science mattered, that observation and patience could conquer even the smallest enemies. After winning the Nobel Prize, Koch became more than just a scientist. He became a global ambassador for medicine. Governments invited him to speak at conferences and inspect health systems. He traveled to India, where he studied the plague and cholera outbreaks, and then to the United States, where he was warmly received by American scientists and public health officials. Wherever he went, he promoted the principles of hygiene, early diagnosis, and scientific training. His ideas influenced how hospitals were built, how water was treated, and how public health campaigns were organized. In this way, Koch helped move medicine from the laboratory into the heart of society. Even so, he remained humble in his conversations. When students asked for advice, he often replied, "Look carefully, record what you see, question everything, and above all, respect your patients." In his 60s, Koch began to slow down. Years of travel, field work, and emotional strain had weakened his body. He suffered from chest pain, fatigue, and a deep cough, possibly signs of the very disease he had spent his life fighting. At home, his second wife, Hedwig Freiberg, provided comfort and companionship. Much younger than him, Hedwig brought a sense of energy and warmth that Koch had lacked for many years. She supported his lectures, managed his home, and helped him stay connected to the world outside his laboratory. Koch often spent long afternoons reading scientific journals, revisiting his earlier notebooks, and walking in the countryside. During these times, he thought not only about the past, but about what it all meant. Was his work enough? Had science truly helped humanity, or simply given it more control? These were not questions with easy answers, but Koch no longer sought perfection. He had made mistakes, but he had also laid the foundation for a new age of medicine. In the medical world, Koch's name had become part of the language. Hospitals were named after him. Students studied Koch's postulates, the 4 criteria used to prove a particular microbe causes a specific disease. These rules, though adjusted over time, remain part of microbiology education today. In his final interviews, Koch expressed joy at the rise of younger scientists. He believed that medicine must constantly evolve, and that each generation should build upon the work of the last. His former rival, Louis Pasteur, had passed away years earlier. The war between German and French science had cooled, replaced by mutual respect. In his later writings, Koch even praised Pasteur's achievements, showing how time and wisdom could turn competition into admiration. In April 1910, Koch traveled to Baden-Baden, a quiet spa town in Germany, hoping that rest would ease his breathing problems. But his condition worsened quickly. On May 27, 1910, Robert Koch passed away from a heart attack. He was 66 years old. The news spread quickly. Across Europe and beyond, people mourned the man who had changed medicine. Newspapers called him the conqueror of disease. Scientists held special lectures in his honor. And in Berlin, his body was laid to rest in a special tomb beneath the Robert Koch Institute, a research center he had helped to found. His ashes remain there to this day, a quiet monument to a man whose life was spent peering into the unseen world and changing it forever. Robert Koch's story is not only about microbes, awards, and discoveries. It is about curiosity, resilience, and the search for truth. He taught the world that progress often begins with a question: what is causing this illness? And that the answer can save lives. He also showed us that even great scientists are human. They make mistakes, face criticism, suffer personal loss, and carry the weight of responsibility. But through all this, they continue. "We are not perfect," Koch once said, "but science allows us to get closer to perfection, one step at a time." Chapter 10: Legacy and Lessons from Robert Koch's Life. When Robert Koch died in 1910, the world paused to remember a man who had done more than discover germs. He had transformed the way we fight disease, redefined the tools of modern science, and most importantly, taught humanity how to think differently about the invisible world around us. Over a century later, Koch's name still echoes in hospitals, universities, and laboratories around the globe. But his legacy is more than a name on a plaque. It is a living system of thought, a way of observing, testing, and understanding life. Koch's most lasting contribution was not just a single discovery, but a new way of doing science. Before him, medicine was often based on guesswork and tradition. Koch introduced a strict, logical system. Observe the illness carefully, identify the potential cause, isolate the organism, prove that it causes the disease. This method became known as Koch's postulates. It is still used with updates in the study of viruses, bacteria, and parasites. His approach laid the foundation for virology, immunology, and molecular biology. In today's world, especially in the wake of global pandemics, Koch's method is more important than ever. Scientists who developed vaccines for COVID-19, Ebola, or Zika have followed similar principles. Many, without even knowing it, came from Koch. One of Koch's final projects was the establishment of the Robert Koch Institute in Berlin. This institute, founded in 1891, remains one of the world's leading centers for infectious disease control, public health research, and global health cooperation. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the institute played a central role in Germany's response. Its scientists provided statistics, advised the government, and tracked outbreaks just as Koch himself once did for cholera and tuberculosis. In this way, Koch's influence has not ended. His tools, structures, and vision continue to shape our present and prepare us for the future. Koch's work sparked the birth of tropical medicine, a branch of science focused on diseases found in warm climates like malaria, yellow fever, and sleeping sickness. This was crucial not just for Europeans, but for millions of people living in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Today, global health organizations like the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, and Doctors Without Borders carry on this legacy. They all rely on the principles Koch promoted: evidence-based care, prevention, surveillance, and education. Koch's life is also a story of personal growth and persistence. He started as a small-town doctor with no lab, no funding, and little support. He built microscopes himself. He tested ideas late into the night. He made mistakes, suffered criticism, but continued learning. If Robert Koch could see the world today, our vaccines, our global travel, our mobile health apps, he might be amazed. He might also be concerned. He would likely remind us that science is only part of the answer. The other part is human behavior, how we care for one another, how we educate our communities, how we respond with truth and courage during health crises. Koch believed in facts, but he also believed in values, honesty, discipline, empathy, and humility. Robert Koch died in 1910, but his voice is still heard. It speaks through hospital policies, biology textbooks, and health campaigns. It also speaks to the learner, reading these words, reminding us that knowledge matters, that language opens doors, and that one life can truly make a difference. To observe is to understand. To understand is to act. And to act is to change the world. Thanks for learning with Ku English. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time.